Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is What Dreams May Come by Richard Matheson. Now, What Dreams May Come was published in 1978. Now, Richard Matheson is the author of books like I Am Legend, The Shrinking Man, Hell House, A Stir of Echoes, Earthbound, and many others. Also, some of the most famous episodes of The Twilight Zone were either written by or based on short stories by Richard Matheson. Episodes like Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, Little Girl Lost, Death Ship, Third from the Sun, The Invaders. Matheson was also a huge influence on people like Stephen King, Dean Koontz, Anne Rice, Robert McCammon, George Romero, and even Steven Spielberg. Actually, one of Spielberg's first movies, Duel, was based on a short story by Richard Matheson. But I'm a huge Richard Matheson fan. For me, he deserves to be ranked alongside the likes of Bradbury. Now, I've already reviewed What Dreams May Come back in 2012, and that review is still up, however it's no longer public. It's now marked as unlisted, but you can see it with a link, and I'll leave a link in the description below to where you could check out my 2012 review on this book. I just wanted to redo it because this is one of my favorite books, and frankly, a lot of the reviews I did back then I think kinda sucked, and God, look at the head of hair I had on me back then. I was less fat, though. Now, I first read What Dreams May Come when I was in high school. This was back in 2009, and I was already becoming a huge Richard Matheson fan from I Am Legend and some of his short stories. And I remember when I first read this book, I was so deeply moved by the story, and was also very intrigued by the novel's ideas and its depictions of heaven and hell. And I've always had a fascination with the concept of the afterlife, and this novel only served to fuel that fascination even more, and I've always pondered things like the existence of God. Now, I do believe in God, but I've always been very critical of organized religion, and I don't really follow any one particular religion. This novel definitely appealed to me in the sense that it's about heaven and hell, but it's not necessarily the Christian heaven and hell. It does talk about God, and it implies that there is a God, but it also takes into account all religions, and basically says what you believed in your lifetime will shape your experience in the afterlife, so in a way it's saying all religions are right and wrong at the same time. And I've always thought that this book had such a unique take on the concepts of heaven and hell. Now, during this time, Richard Matheson was very much embracing New Age philosophy, and I will say the book does get a little heavy-handed with it, but I would argue that you could still enjoy this book as a fantasy novel, even if you don't personally believe in New Age philosophy. Now, during this time, Richard Matheson, who up until this point was primarily known for horror and science fiction, was very much starting to dabble in the romance genre, and in a lot of ways this book is sort of a spiritual successor to his 1975 novel Bid-Time Return, which was later retitled Somewhere in Time. That was very much a romance novel as well, but with a time travel twist. Basically, Somewhere in Time, aka Bid-Time Return, was a story about a love that transcends time. What Dreams May Come is a story about a love that transcends death and heaven and hell. Now, as much as I Am Legend is my favorite Matheson novel, this I think is his best, and both this and I Am Legend are two of my top 5 favorite books of all time. Now, the plot of What Dreams May Come is it's about a writer named Chris Nielsen who's killed in a car accident, and after he dies, he goes to heaven, or what we would call heaven, and he's reunited with a relative of his named Albert, who he was very close to, who died when Chris was a young man. And Albert becomes sort of his spiritual guide through the afterlife. Now, when Chris was alive, he was deeply devoted to his wife Anne, and he finds that even heaven is not complete without her. But we soon learn that Anne, who already had emotional problems before Chris died, has taken her own life, and because she committed suicide, her soul is now condemned to hell. So now Chris, despite Albert's warnings, tries to journey into hell to save Anne's soul, but by doing so, he also runs the risk of becoming lost there forever. Now, the whole book is written as if it's a letter sent from Chris from the afterlife to his brother Robert, who is still alive, so throughout it, he constantly refers to Robert as if he's speaking to him. And the character of Robert, who we see in the beginning and the end of the novel, is almost like a stand-in for the reader. Basically, in the beginning of the novel, Robert meets this woman who claims to be psychic, who claims to have communicated with Chris, and basically Chris dictated this manuscript to her from beyond the grave, which she gives to Robert, and the whole book is the manuscript that Robert has received. So it plays around with the whole story within the story trope. One thing I thought was pretty cool, since I'm from Long Island, you find out in the beginning that the character of Robert is from the town of Islip, which is a town here on Long Island. I thought that was kind of cool. Obviously, anybody who's not from Long Island isn't gonna give a shit, but I thought it was pretty cool. Now, Richard Matheson, of course, takes a lot of stuff from mythology and other works of literature. Now, the title, What Dreams May Come, comes from a line from Hamlet. And there's also a lot of elements in here of Dante's The Divine Comedy. Like, you could look at Chris as a stand-in for Dante, and Albert as a stand-in for Virgil, and you could look at Chris's love for Anne as being a stand-in for Dante's love of Beatrice. And obviously, the basic premise of the novel is kind of a modernization of the Greek myth of Orpheus trying to save his wife from Hades. And the novel has a very intriguing and imaginative take on heaven. This idea that everything in heaven is mental, that when you get to heaven, you create the reality around you with your mind, as if heaven is a collective dream that you share with the people who died before you. Now, throughout most of the book, heaven is referred to as Summerland, but you get the idea that Summerland is just one level of heaven. It's implied that there are many levels of heaven, and over a period of thousands of years, the human soul will elevate to these other levels. I thought that was a really interesting concept. And it's implied that there is a final level of heaven that is essentially the mind of God, where the human soul will become one with God. But you don't really know for sure what's on these other levels, so for all you know, maybe there are levels where angels exist, or maybe there are levels where the gods of other religions and other mythologies exist. And the novel definitely tries to combine both Eastern and Western interpretations of the afterlife, and as I said, it does try to take into account all religions. But you also find out that there are lower levels of heaven where people are almost condemned by their own beliefs and their own prejudices. Like, there's one part of the book where Albert shows Chris this church on this lower level of heaven where people are praying for God to take them to heaven, even though they're technically already in heaven. But these are people who cannot accept that they're not immediately meeting God when they get to heaven, or they can't accept that heaven is not what they thought it would be. Albert also shows Chris another lower level of heaven where there are these people who, in their lifetimes, class and economic status were really important to them, and they think that still applies in the afterlife. So as a result, these people have kind of condemned themselves to almost like these little hells within heaven. And I thought that was a really intriguing idea to show that even heaven is not perfect, but it depends on who you are, and it depends on if you can elevate yourself to these higher levels. The book also takes into account ghost phenomenon, like spirits who have become earthbound, or astral projection, and reincarnation becomes a big part of the book, especially towards the end of the novel. So it seems like Richard Matheson wanted this book to basically be like the final word on the concept of the afterlife. Now, even though I certainly wouldn't call this a horror novel, when it gets to hell, it almost does become a horror novel. novel, and the novel's concept of hell is also pretty intriguing, where even though it's implied that there is a God, God is not really the one who condemns people to hell. Rather, a lot of people are in hell because of the law of karma, or in a lot of cases, damnation is self-inflicted and self-imposed. Like, hell is not really a divine judgment, rather it's a self-judgment. Now, you're not sure if there is a Satan or if there are demons in the traditional sense, but if you get to hell, honestly, the thing that's going to torture you the most is yourself and the demons that you create for yourself. Now, even though I do love this book, after reading it a few times, there are things about it that I don't think work 100%. Like, it tries to get into the science, I guess you could say, on how things work in heaven. Like, there's a lot of details in this book about how everything in heaven, or at least everything in Summerland, is made up of an energy that comes from something that the characters in the book refer to as the Matrix. And while it was interesting, did we really need to know all that? And it just kind of gets into details I didn't think were necessary. Also, when the book deals with reincarnation, it gets really in-depth with how reincarnation works, and again, it gets into stuff that I don't think really needed to be explained. And as I said in the beginning of the video, there is a lot of stuff in the book that I do think is very heavy-handed. I think that comes from the fact that this was a very important book to Richard Matheson. Like, he really wanted this book to sort of open people's minds and get them to rethink certain ideas they might have had about the afterlife. But minor flaws aside, I still think this is an amazing book, and this is still one of my top 5 favorite books of all time. I think it's partly when I read this for the first time. I was 16 the first time I read this book, and it just affected me on such a deep and emotional level. And I think it's a great fantasy novel, it's a moving love story, and it's also a really thought-provoking and humanistic portrait of the afterlife. Now, this book was adapted into a 1998 film of the same name, starring Robin Williams. Now, I'll talk more about the film adaptation after I cut to my friend Christian Feliciano, who is a regular guest in my videos, giving his thoughts on this book.
What Dreams May Come, I believe, is Richard Matheson's most beautiful work. Now, my favorite work of his is I Am Legend, but I think this is his most beautiful work. This is the most artistic. This is the one that I think people who don't even like Richard Matheson's work because they don't like horror or science fiction or pulpish short stories, anything like that, this is the one that they could read and say, wow, this guy is an amazing author. This is the one that will stick with them. This is the most fantastical. This is everything that an author tries to get to at some point in their career. This is the book that I believe everybody who writes stories wants to write. This is the one that, you want, you might write your whatever stories you're writing, you want one that's going to be considered the masterpiece, one that's going to be taught in colleges, one that's going to be remembered forever. It's going to be reinterpreted in so many other ways. It's going to inspire other people, other authors to write their own works. And What Dreams May Come is that novel. I think this is, like I said, his most beautiful. It's his most well-written story. It's so great because he describes this afterlife in such a beautiful way. And of course, the character in the beginning dies. That's not a spoiler. That's what happened. The guy dies and he goes into the afterlife. And that's pretty much what the story is about. It's his journey through the afterlife. And it is fantastic. It's amazing. It's inspired me in some of my stories about how to describe things and what I see the afterlife as. In my stories, of course, not in real life. My real life has nothing to do with it, but just in my stories of how, what I'm trying to get to when I'm describing the afterlife. And I think, it's a really good story. It's mostly about that. It's very Dante's Inferno-ish because, it's a guy traveling through the afterlife, but it's different because it's more modern. it's not as, I don't want to say barbaric, but the language obviously is more modern. So people who won't read Dante's Inferno because they can't understand it, they'll definitely be able to understand this one because it's written in more modern English. So you'll be able to understand that at least. And yeah, it's a really, really great book. It's short. It's not long. I think it's under 300 pages. But it is worth every page. This is what I love about Richard Matheson. Every page, every sentence, every word, every paragraph is tight. Everything is, there's never a point where you're like, oh God, just come on, skip ahead to the next. No, like everything matters. Everything that he writes matters. And yes, that's in his other stories as well, like I Am Legend. I think Duel is another one that I think is very tight. But with this one, it matters more because he's trying to build this afterlife that you can see and imagine and just take you away to this other world. And I think it's great. I love it. Yes, it has its sad moments here and there, but it's really, really, really beautiful, and it is really engaging. I think once you pick it up, you're never going to want to put it down until it's over. And you might even want to read it again, because I remember that the first time I read it, I put the book down and I was like, oh my God. I was speechless for a while. Couldn't think of anything else. So then I went and I picked it up again, and I had to at least read some parts of it again, just because I really enjoyed it. I wanted to see that part again. I wanted to read it again. And yeah, I mean, Richard Matheson is one of the greatest authors of our time. His writing is beyond good. It's beyond great. There's no word really to describe his prose style. He just is. He's amazing. He's just, there's a reason why people like Stephen King were inspired by him. He's just one of the greatest authors of all time. And I highly recommend that everybody check this book out. Everybody, whether you're a Richard Matheson fan or not, definitely check this out. If you're a fan of Neil Gaiman, check it out. If you're a fan of fantasy, if you're a fan of Dante's Inferno, check it out. You'll enjoy it. And yeah, thank you so much. Bye-bye.
So, in 1998, we had a movie based on this book, directed by Vincent Ward, who also directed movies like The Navigator and Map to the Human Heart, and he also wrote an early draft of Alien 3. Now, the movie changes a lot from the book, and I mean a lot, but I will argue that it stays true to the general themes of the novel. But I actually really like the movie. I can understand why some people wouldn't like it, because it can be kind of sappy in some scenes or overly melodramatic, and there are some things in the movie that I do think are a little cheesy. But if you could look past some aspects of the movie that might be a little corny, I do think it's a really good movie. It's a very emotionally moving film, and it's also a very sad, very melancholy film as well, as it probably should be, because it's a story about death and about dealing with death, and much like the book, it's a very thought-provoking and unique take on the concepts of heaven and hell. And the movie is just visually stunning. Like, I definitely think it deserved the Oscar it won for Best Visual Effects. Now, the film starred Robin Williams as Chris Nielsen. Now, in the movie, they made Chris a doctor instead of a writer, but Robin Williams gave an amazing performance in that movie, but it's Robin Williams, it kinda goes without saying. Even when that man was in crap, he brought his A-game to it. And while Robin Williams was a great comedian, and he was definitely a brilliant comedic actor, I think he was very underrated as a dramatic actor. Like, his work in drama films, I think, cannot be understated. Like, his performances in movies like Good Will Hunting, 1 Hour Photo, World According to Garp, he was very underappreciated as a dramatic actor. But Robin Williams was an amazing actor, and it's such a shame that he's no longer with us. The movie also starred Cuba Gooding Jr. as Albert, who is much different than he is in the book. In the book, Albert is Chris's cousin, whereas in the movie, Albert is just a friend of Chris who died before him, although there is kind of a twist with the character of Albert in the movie that I don't want to give away in case you haven't seen the movie. As I said, the movie is very, very different from the book. In the movie, Annabella Sciorra played Anne, and in the movie they made Anne an artist, which she wasn't in the book, but her paintings end up playing a pretty important role in the story. The movie also had a small role from Max von Sydow, another actor who's sadly no longer with us, who people might recognize from movies like The Exorcist and The Seventh Seal. He plays a pretty interesting character in the movie called the Tracker, who is technically not a character from the book, but kind of is. Again, kind of like Albert, there is sort of a twist with this character. Rosalind Chow, who people might recognize as Keiko O'Brien from Star Trek The Next Generation and Star Trek Deep Space Nine, has a small role in the movie. The movie also changes the role of Chris and Anne's children. In the book, Chris and Anne have 4 kids, and they're adults when Chris and Anne die, and they're still alive in the book, whereas in the movie, they only have 2 kids, a boy and a girl, and they both get killed a few years before Chris dies. And I think they did that to maybe justify a little bit more why Anne would commit suicide, because now that Chris is gone, she literally has no one else. But at the same time, it's also like, Jesus Christ, how much bad luck can a family have? Now, the movie also takes the concept of heaven being a collective dream one step further, where when you first get to heaven, you basically have your own private heaven, and Chris's private heaven is one of Anne's paintings. But yeah, I really liked the movie. I know at the time, despite winning an Oscar, it got very mixed reviews. I know Siskel and Ebert really liked the movie, and the movie was also referenced on Family Guy. There was a little gag in a Family Guy episode where Peter was in a video store and the clerk kept trying to push on him a free copy of What Dreams May Come, and Peter kept refusing it, so I guess whoever wrote that Family Guy episode wasn't a fan of this movie. Now I want to cut to my friend Christian again, giving his thoughts on the movie What Dreams May Come. When it cuts back to me, I'm going to be talking about some things that are similar to What Dreams May Come and may or may not have been inspired by the book.
I tried sacrificing a piece of steak. I tried burning down all the trees in my backyard to pay homage to the elf that lives back there. But all I did was kill it, and I cried for 2 days. I tried writing a letter to Santa Claus, and nothing brought Robin Williams back. Which is a shame, because Robin Williams was not only one of our best comedians, but he was one of the greatest actors in existence. I mean, he really could play any role. He could be funny, he could be sad, he could be scary at times. I mean, I've seen him be really, really creepy, and everything he did just seemed to work. And in this movie, he's, there's no exception. He's just fantastic. What Dreams May Come it's a hard movie to explain to people, because if you just say, well, it's a vision of the afterlife, people go, oh yeah, nice. And then they just kind of move on from it. And then if you say it's a Robin Williams film, their first thought is, well, it must be one of his worst ones, because the only ones I remember are blank, blank, blank. They'll bring up the ones that everybody knows. And this is one of his lesser ones, because at least in my circle, because the people I've talked to about this film, not many of them have seen it. Not many of them will see it. They kind of brush it off like if it's Bicentennial Man or one of those. But it actually is a good film, at least to me. It's mostly good because of the beauty in it. It looks like a giant painting. Everything in the film looks like a painting. And in fact, everything, as Robin Williams moves through the afterlife, everything kind of rubs off, because the idea is that the paint is still wet in the afterlife. All the flowers, the trees, everything he does is it moves through, just kind of rubs off because it's still drying, because he had just died in the beginning of the film. So now he's seeing his heaven and it's still wet. And I love that. I thought it was great. He's beautiful. I mean, he's perfect, but he's always good. That's not even a surprise. He's always good. Even in a horrible film, Robin Williams he's usually going to be really good. Cuba Gooding Jr., sorry about that, is also the same thing. He's always good in every film he does, and he's good in this one. Like I said, I love the visual stuff. That pretty much takes over the film, because that's pretty much what the film is about, just like that's what the book was about, of What Dreams May Come. Now, yes, I like the book better. That's just, that's always going to be the default for many people. They're always going to like the book better, but that doesn't really matter, because the movie, to me, is still good. I love the vision of hell. I love what they did with hell. The idea that he has to go save, his loved one from hell. That was really fun. The film ends a little bit different than the book, but that's okay, because the ending of the movie fits the whole movie. It just fits the tone of the movie. It fits everything that was already happening before. And plus, we know it's Hollywood, so they're going to do things a little different. And it was fine for me. I enjoyed the film from beginning to end. I have pretty much no problems with it. I think everything is pretty good. I enjoy it. Like I said, it's not one of my top Robin Williams films, but it definitely is a really good film. And I recommend everybody check it out. And thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Now, I don't know if this was inspired by What Dreams May Come or not, but in the 80s there was a Swamp Thing comic written by Alan Moore. This was during Alan Moore's run on that series, where Abby is taken to hell and Swamp Thing has to journey into hell to save Abby, but at a certain point in that issue, Swamp Thing ends up in heaven and he sees Alec Holland and his wife in heaven. And at a certain point, Alec Holland says that him and his wife might choose to get reincarnated. So the idea of reincarnation being a choice that you can make in heaven, it felt like it might have been taken from What Dreams May Come, but I don't know that for sure. Also, certain aspects of Neil Gaiman's Sandman series reminded me a little bit of What Dreams May Come, like the dream world in the Sandman series. There were some aspects of it that reminded me a little bit of Summerland from this book. Also, the fourth Sandman graphic novel, Season of Mist, was about Morpheus going into hell to save a former lover of his. Now, granted, Richard Matheson, of course, is not the first person to come up with that concept. Obviously, that goes all the way back to the Greek myth of Orpheus. But what happened with Nada at the end of Season of Mist reminded me a lot of what happens at the end of What Dreams May Come. Now, these books might not necessarily have been inspired by What Dreams May Come, but I actually think books like The Five People You Meet in Heaven by Mitch Albom and The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold would make really interesting companion pieces to What Dreams May Come, in the sense that heaven in those books isn't necessarily a religious heaven. Like, there might be a god, but God isn't really important in those stories. Rather, they're more humanistic portraits of heaven. Now, there's a Death Cab for Cutie song called I Will Follow You Into the Dark that, again, might not have been inspired by this novel, but the lyrics definitely bring to mind some of the themes and ideas and imagery from this novel. But yeah, that was my review on What Dreams May Come by Richard Matheson, and bye.